back. Welcome to another episode of the Champions of Home Care podcast. Today we're going to tackle a task that most choice home care clients have to navigate to get their services started, and that's how to hire a caregiver. Depending on what services you qualify for and what you personally are looking for in a caregiver, the questions you should ask likely vary. But David, we got some experts who are going to be here to help us out.
Well, you're right, Jason. And first of all, let me say it's good to see you again today. And luckily, we do have a couple of seasoned veterans joining us today to talk us through the hiring process. First, let me introduce someone who knows all about the hiring process and helping employees succeed. Accra's very own Senior Human Resources Director, Hannah Rutt. Hannah, thanks for being with us today. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. And second, we have with us someone who personally has navigated the caregiver hiring process several times for his own home care services. So let's also welcome Rand Stenjum, who is a client of Accra. Rand, thanks for being with us today. And how are you doing today?
Pleasure.
Good. Good.
Well.
Wonderful. So let's just start right in. And maybe, Rand, let's start with you. Where should people look for prospective caregivers? How do you go about finding caregivers to fill your schedule?
Well, I've been looking for caregivers for 46 years now. And I guess I started going through papers. I'm sure that they're still valid, probably not as much these days, but the Minneapolis Tribune, the Sun Country, they're not Sun Country, but Sun Current Times, the local newspapers, that kind of things. What I've been using the last few years is and it's been successful has been care.com. And care.com is, it has all the templates out there and how to create job postings, and it has all that kinds of information. And it's unfortunately $75 a quarter. So you have to really buy into a premium membership, and that's worked really well. I've also used Indeed, and Indeed is also price goes with that. So that they don't really offer the means to write successful job postings or how to interview or any of those kinds of things. But I think it's $5 a day or $150 a month, something like that for Indeed. And I'm relatively new, actually not less than probably 6 months new to Accra, and I think that you guys have a Accra portal posting site that I haven't been able to utilize. I've looked at it, but I haven't been able to utilize it yet. I see there's some people on there very close to where I live, but at some point that'll be my first free choice before I start getting money.
Well, Hannah, in hearing what Rand was just saying there about the Accra site, can you talk to that for a little bit and about the job board that we have and so forth?
Yeah, so this past fall, we relaunched our Accra Job Board. And so what's really nice about this is that all of the caregiver postings that you'll see, they're actually Accra employees. So they've already gone through the background study process. And depending on what service you need, they may have already completed all of the necessary paperwork. So that you can search through those postings. You're able to customize a posting and search for caregivers based on what type of experience you're looking for, where they're at in the state of Minnesota, and kind of some of their different experiences that they've had. And you don't have to worry about them having to complete a new background study. All of those employees are in good standing with Accra. So we really hope it's a much better resource than what we've currently had or what's available out there.
And if Rand or another Accra client entered that portal and found somebody on that list that they wanted to interview or start working with, how would they go about initiating that process?
Yep. So within the job board, which is in your Accra Access portal, you can contact an employee or a caregiver who's looking for that job and email them. And then once you guys have decided, hey, sounds like it's gonna work out, then you just have to call Accra and let us know, and we'll let you know if they have any additional paperwork that they need to complete or when they can get started. So we try to make it pretty easy for everyone.
Well, and because they've already gone through the background study, and all that, and they're already an approved Accra employee, it really cuts that turnaround time for someone like Rand to be able to get them started, on their first shift, correct?
Yep. Correct. Yep.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, Rand, back to you for a second. I mean, I know that as you mentioned in your opening remarks that you've been doing this for 40 plus years, interviewing and hiring caregivers, and Rand and I are close personal friends as well. So I've gotten to know several of his caregivers, and I've actually been his caregiver on a few occasions as well when we've traveled together and things as friends. But Rand, when you're entering into that hiring process, when you're thinking about or scheduling interviews with someone, what kind of questions, what kind of information are you looking for, or would you advise others to kind of think about asking when they're preparing those interview questions?
Well, I mean, they need to be able to describe their past experience, and that kind of, when they're describing their past experience, it gives me a kind of a window into what they've done in the past, and the good thing about care.com is that it gives you they've already provided you like a resume, or so you know what their level of experience is. Well, you don't know for sure, what they wrote as their experience, and how many years they've been doing it, what their skill levels are, what certifications they might have. I know with care.com they do a basic background check, nothing, not enough, but they do a basic background check. But I just ask them about their previous experience, if I could call their previous employer, if they have a car, if they're able to drive, if they're willing to do find replacements, if they're going to be gone for any point of time, if I don't know, if there's, of course, if they're a citizen, if they're able to work, and all those just lots of those kinds of things.
Well, Rand, do you get as specific with your interviews in asking the prospective employee their capabilities of lifting and transferring, and their ability to use a Hoyer lift, or get as specific as that with your interviews?
I've learned that this specific items are best put in the job description itself.
Okay.
So that probably the most important part is just the job description title itself.
Mm-hmm.
And probably I'll give a brief history of myself, but I mean really brief. Just
Mm-hmm.
I've been disabled for so many years, and I'm what my condition is. I'll give a description of the skills that I'm looking for. Whether it requires lifting, if it requires toileting, if require,
Mm-hmm.
and then also what the exact times are that I need somebody to fill in or to work. So, and I think that it's that's pretty much it.
Hannah, would you, I mean, hearing what Rand just said in terms of the kinds of questions that he prepares to ask interviewees, what additional questions would you recommend that our listeners think about asking prospective employees as they're applying for and interviewing for the job?
Yeah, so I think a really good place to start is by identifying what's important to you and what are you looking for in a caregiver, and trying to model those questions around that. As Rand said, starting with the job posting, that's a great place to start, and putting those specifics in, so that as people are reading those postings, they can go and kind of decide, is this something that I'm capable of doing? Is this something I'm interested in? So that by the time you get to that interview, you're ready to go. Sometimes it's nice to think, do you want someone who has common interests with you? Do you want someone who has specific experience with your age range or your care needs? Or is that something that you're
Mm-hmm.
willing to help them train on? But then you can also think about situations that might come up in your day-to-day life or during the course of their job, and ask them how they might handle that. So, for example, how would you handle an emergency? Or what would you do if you woke up and didn't feel well? How would you, communicate with that with me? And that the caregiver's response is going to give you kind of an idea of this is someone that you can trust and you can rely on.
And what's next, Hannah? Once you've done the interviews and you've evaluated some candidates, perhaps you've narrowed it down to a couple or one that you really want to hire. What's the next steps that you take that for Hannah or Rand?
Yeah, so if you're ready to make that hire, the first thing that you're going to want to do is call Accra and let us know that you have a prospective caregiver that you want to go through the hiring process. We'll check to see if they've already been hired with Accra, and if so, if they have any additional paperwork that they need. If they've never worked with Accra, we'll start by having them complete an application, and they'll likely need to be fingerprinted for their background study. So once they've submitted all of that necessary paperwork, we'll help the caregiver through the fingerprint process. And then once we get that eligible background study, we'll reach out to you with their start date.
Can I circle back? Great question, Jason. I'm glad you asked that because I think it's oftentimes that next step where people kind of stall on sometimes. But I want to go back to the interview process for just a second as well, because as we at Accra, as we have expanded our client base into different communities, and I'm just wondering what's the best way in the interview process? And Rand and Hannah, either one of you or both of you can certainly respond to this, but getting into those areas and those questions that deal with cultural competencies. What would you advise is the best way to approach those kinds of questions that deal with that cultural competency?
I'm not sure I understand what you mean by cultural competency.
Well, I mean, so I know that there are, if you're interviewing individuals from a different culture than your own, how do you go about interviewing or asking the questions that help you identify whether or not there's going to be a cultural comfortability between you and your potential caregiver? I mean, maybe they celebrate different holidays than you do. Maybe they have different religious practices than you do. Maybe they have different cultural activities that they engage in on a regular basis than you do. Does that enter into the interview process or not? And if so, how do you address that during the interview?
And David, this is kind of within the realm you're talking about too, but we also talked about even just personal qualities, right? So
exactly.
Being a morning person, for example, or needing an afternoon rest. I don't know, I'm just coming up with examples, but we've talked about a lot of the experience that you need or that you'll be examining while you're evaluating potential caregivers. But there's also those personal qualities, right? Because this is such a intimate position and relationship that you develop with a caregiver, where you kind of want to know that person before you hire them.
Yeah, exactly. And does that enter into the interview process, and if so, how do you address it?
Well, frankly, the shortage of workers has put us in a situation where, and I don't know if it's addressing it or not, but it's that becomes a very secondary issue.
Okay.
My first goal is to find someone who's capable and willing and interested in doing the job. And if I've had, as you know, Dave, because you know me so well, that I've had a huge variety of different people.
Yes, you have
working for me, and it's as long as I can find someone who's capable, like I said, and interested in doing the job, I've never had an issue with that. So,
okay,
I'm sure they exist, but I've been lucky, I guess.
Well, and I don't want to make this about me, but I'll use myself as an example. I mean, as a middle-aged gay man, if I suddenly found myself in the circumstance of needing a caregiver, understanding that caregiver's comfortability with the fact that I'm a gay man might be important to me. And that seems like, and I'm sure that some of our clients identify in the GLBTQ plus community as well. It would seem reasonable. And I just wonder, Hannah, maybe you can address that better. How does how does one go about addressing those kind of cultural competency issues that are important to the client for comfortability's sake? Am I asking a ridiculous? Maybe I'm asking a ridiculous question. I don't know.
No, I think it's the tough part is, again, as Rand said, the workforce shortage. It's so hard because if you find someone who's capable, you want to get them in, get them hired.
Mhm.
But I think it kind of goes back to setting those expectations in the interview process, and just, even starting by like, this is what a day in my life looks like. I'm going to need you to be here at this time. Here's the things that are important to me throughout the day. And you can always say, like, this is what we this is what I like to do, and these are the communities that I'm a part of. And I'm going to need someone to help kind of support that. So instead of asking the question, are you comfortable with that? It's more so, this is the expectation and this is what's important to me. I'm looking for someone who respects those choices.
I like that. I like that approach, Hannah, because I think it also establishes simultaneously some of those boundaries
Yep.
as well that are so important in that caregiver relationship. So what a great answer. That was really good. Jason?
Yeah, I have another like interviewing logistical question, which probably seems obvious to people who have done this before, but to someone who's doing it for the first time, it's like, I guess it's my choice. But now in this digital world, I'm sure lots of people are doing interviews on Zoom or on Teams, or maybe they're doing it on the phone, maybe they're doing it in person. Do you have a recommendation to first time people who are hiring caregivers and whether they should meet in person, do it on the phone? Should they do 2 rounds of interviews? Or is it just up to them and what they're comfortable with?
So
Rand?
I never hire someone just on the phone. I narrow it down to, in a lot of cases recently, again, because of the worker shortage situation, I narrow it down to the one person that I really want to hire. And before I actually hire them, I meet them in person so that we can, become familiar with each other. And in almost every single case that everything is good, and I move forward and hire that person.
Hannah, you were going to add?
Yeah, I was going to say, sometimes doing that first kind of phone screen, and really just going over maybe the job description with them so that they understand, what you're looking for. Sometimes you'll weed people out that way. They may have said, oh, I didn't really realize this, or all those dates and times don't work with me. So that can be a really good way to help make sure that someone understands the position. And then at that point, I do think meeting them, if you're not comfortable meeting them in your home, maybe finding a community place to meet, such as a coffee shop or a library. But at some point, I do think it's important that you invite them to your home, and to make sure that they're comfortable there as well.
Sure. It makes perfect sense. It makes really good sense. So, okay, so you've gone through the interview process. You've identified individuals or an individual that you would like to hire, and they begin the work process in providing services. Rand, how do you go about, and how frequently, and what techniques do you use to evaluate the quality of care that they're providing?
If they show up on time, that's my number one.
Sure.
They got to show up. That if they can't show up, then they're not going to last. So they've got to show up. I can work with, with most anybody if it takes them a while to get in the swing of things, and probably, it's again, if they show up, that's if they're willing to show up and willing to do the work, that's primary.
Well, and I know from our personal relationship, Rand, that you're very candid with your caregivers, and you're very good about letting them know what they're doing well and what they're not doing well in the moment. And if they're doing something incorrectly, like I've done a few times, you're very good about redirecting in the moment as well and getting it back on track so that the caregiver is learning simultaneously to having their behavior redirected. So, and I think, that's a really good way of tracking someone's job performance as well. Hannah, from an organizational standpoint, are there methods that you use or that Accra uses to track performance?
Yeah, so we do actually have some templates that we're always happy to provide our clients and responsible parties with. I think it's important to address and give feedback often and then timely as well. So even if your PCA is doing a great job, let them know that. Um, and then if there's things that they could be improving on, address it, as it comes up. In the moments, I think probably the easiest. But sometimes it's even if there's little things that kind of build over time, address those things that come up. And because sometimes it might be that they just need a refresher on how to do a certain task, or they might need a little bit of different type of training. We all learn in different ways. So um, if you address it early enough, it kind of gives you that opportunity. But if you do get to a point where you're like, this is a really significant concern, um, or it's getting to the point where you're like, I'm not really sure if this is going to work out, we always suggest writing, making a kind of documentation of what the concern was, when it's occurring, and then maybe what are some things that you would like to see the person improve on moving forward. And another really great thing that you can do is have your employee be a part of that. So say,
Mhm.
okay, this is kind of a problem. What would help you improve upon this, or what can we agree on that you'll work on and work towards, and giving that employee some of that ownership. And again, kind of sets that boundary that you talked about earlier, Dave. It's just helpful making sure that the employee feels that they're a part of that process as well.
Well, Hannah, that kind of leads to another question. I mean, if a client like Rand is having some difficulty with their interaction or their job performance of their PCA or whatever, and they're not exactly sure how to address it, or they're feeling a little uncomfortable about addressing it, is can they turn to APRA and our HR department for some resource and assistance in addressing those issues as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Our staff are definitely able to help. We can identify, are there again some different types of trainings that are available online? If it's more of kind of a technical issue that you're running into,
Mhm.
um, we're also able to help kind of be that middle person if you're saying, hey, there's something that I'm really concerned about, and I'm not quite sure of how to approach it. Maybe it's a more sensitive topic. Um, or you're just kind of getting to that point where like it's not really working, we're happy to help jump in and either give you guidance to handle it, or work with the employee
Mhm.
as well.
Great. Well, we know that ACRA is a PCA choice provider. And the other model that's currently available is the traditional model. Are there different responsibilities for the client and the agency between those two models, Hannah?
Yep. So under the PCA Choice program, you as a client are really serving as a co-employer with ACRA. So your responsibility in knowing the program rules, selecting your own staff, training those staff, and then scheduling your staff as well. And obviously, your care manager will work closely with you to help identify those resources. You always have ACRA as a resource, in case you have a question that comes up. Um, but then on Accra's side, our main responsibility is making sure that we're hiring the employee and being compliant with all of the federal and state employment laws and all of the program rules. But then also making sure that we're getting your employees paid on time. And so we'll help kind of anything along the way. But, again, as that client, you're really double checking, making sure that the times that employees are working are recorded properly, the tasks that they're doing are recorded appropriately, and then verifying this information, when time cards are due and at your annual visits and things like that.
Great.
Yeah.
And
And
go ahead, Jason.
Hannah, there's also a big change on the horizon with PCA Choice becoming Community First Services and supports starting in the fall. How is that going to change the staffing requirements for people who are hiring caregivers? And we don't need every little piece of minutia, perhaps, but on a high level, as people start thinking about how things are going to change with CFSS, what do they have to be aware of?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest changes is that ACRA is now going to be able to help assist with that staffing element. So we'll be able to help source caregivers, and then we'll be able to work with you to identify if you need caregivers or even just backup staffing, um, and kind of what that looks like. Um, it's still very much client directed, and so we'll, again, work with you, and we'll listen to you and say, here's what we have available, and hopefully we can help match up um, employees with clients, um, and everything. Obviously, lots to will change and lots more to come on that. But we hope will be a better resource for that staffing challenge, hopefully.
Great. And, Rand, one last question for you. I mean, as we kind of begin to wrap up here a little bit, this has been great. As a client, as somebody who needs and uses PCA services, in the context of hiring and supervising and evaluating staff and the services that they provide, what do you look for as a resource from your agency that provides your care?
To do payroll.
Do pay and do it on time and do it effectively and accurately, right? Yeah. Okay.
And I did have a question too, Dave, that maybe one of you, I've done a lot of reading on CFSS, and I haven't found anything about this, but in the budget model for CFS, which is kind of replacing the PCA choice, being there's not a lot of expense, but there's a decent amount of expense that goes into advertising and finding PCAs. Is that going to be part of the budget model, or is that something that I, as a client, consumer, whatever, will have to continue to pay on my own?
I'm going to punt that over to Hannah, because I think she may have a little bit more of that minute information. Hannah, is that something that could be built into a budget? Is a part of the budget model?
I believe so. We've seen clients in the CDCS program. I've seen that written into their budget. They'll have a line item for maybe a care.com membership, or different ways that they advertise postings.
Yeah. I thought so as well, but I didn't want to be premature in responding to that. And I know that you have a little bit deeper knowledge at this point right now. So yeah, absolutely. And Rand, we do have, if you visit our website, we did do a podcast previously on CFSS that provided some information about it. So you can certainly find some there. I believe the DHS website has some limited information about CFSS and its content and its intent as well. But stay tuned to us, because, as now that we have an implementation date, which we'll talk about in a minute, but now that we have that implementation date, one of the things that we're doing internally here is preparing to ramp up some of our communication to our clients and others about CFSS, its implementation, what the client like yourself, the recipient of services, needs to start thinking about in terms of preparing for that transition. So a lot more to come, especially now that we have an implementation date from the Department of Human Services. So great question, though. Great question. Well, thank you both for being with us today. This was really, really helpful, and I think our listeners will grab some information out of the thoughts that you shared, and it will make it a little easier for them, perhaps, or a little more informative as they continue their interview process and trying to find and hire caregivers as well. I mean, Rand mentioned a couple of times the workforce shortage, and I know that continues to be a real challenge for Hannah and our team at HR and within Accra as a whole, and this community as a whole. But we'll continue to do our best to try to address that and be a partner and a resource in that process with folks like Rand. So thank you both for being here. Any final comments you'd like to share or thoughts to impart? No? Okay.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both very much for joining us today and sharing your insights.
Absolutely. Thank you both.
Thanks for having us.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, they were both phenomenal, David. And that's such a key part, is just getting started, right?
It is.
Getting past that first hurdle of finding a caregiver who's going to be well suited to your services.
Yeah, right. Finding that caregiver that you're compatible with and that you have confidence in. And I can, don't mean to speak for Rand, but I know one of his caregivers has been with him for more than 20 years. And when you find that kind of relationship, somebody that sticks with you for that long a period of time, that's pretty significant as well. And when you think about the kinds of intimate care that people are being provided, finding that right person becomes just so absolutely essential. It's just so important. So, but as you mentioned, Jason, CFSS is coming. And we just recently got the start date. It's going to, the Department of Human Services informed us that on October 1st of 2024, this fall, DHS plans to begin the CFSS implementation with consultation services. So people who receive services will begin the transition process from PCA or CSG to CFSS during their regularly scheduled annual reassessment. So not everybody's going to, they're not going to flip a switch and everybody's on October 2nd, everybody moves to CFSS.
I wish it was that easy.
Yeah. Well, oh my gosh, that would be a calamity if we had to do it all in one day. But when their reassessment date comes due, that's when they will enter into that transition process to CFSS. And for those who may not be familiar with it, this is a new self-directed option called Community First Services and Supports, or CFSS for short. And it will offer individuals who need home services or home care services more choice, control, and flexibility with their services and supports that are required to live and work in the community. So it's an important transition that's really designed at its most fundamental level to give individuals with disabilities and their families more personal control in their lives. So,
yeah, and we know change can freak a lot of people out, right?
Yeah.
Brings on some new things into your life, but don't need to worry because Accra will provide all the services under the CFSS model. So if you are a current Accra client, you can rest assured that you can continue working with Accra, assuming you want to do so, as well as your current caregiver. So that's not going to change even when CFSS comes along. And as we approach that October 1st implementation date, we here on the podcast and the folks at Accra will keep communicating to clients and caregivers the various updates that you need to know as those updates roll in. So stay tuned. Information will be coming your way. We'll make sure that everyone's prepared for this transition.
Two perfect words. Stay tuned.
Yes. Precisely.
All right.
Well, I think that's it for us today, David.
Wonderful. Well, I think another good podcast. I think this will be informative and helpful for our listeners. And Jason, always a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you for all the prep work you do behind the scenes. I don't think most people realize how much prep work you do behind the scenes to prepare for these. So my great appreciation to you for that, and thanks. So
I provide so little compared to you and our amazing guests. So thank you to you, to Hannah, to Rand, for making this podcast so helpful and informative for the folks out there listening. Make sure to follow us and review the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time. Thanks, Jason.